Yes, so we are ready for it. It is 3 minutes past 7 on this very beautiful evening, very hot evening. So we would like to thank you all for participating in this special session. On behalf of Isaka and Norea, we welcome you all. So we are going to have a nice talk, which we think on behalf of the Antwerp Management School. It will be approximately 45 to 50 minutes where we are going to elaborate on the research project that we've done as Antwerp Management School with two researchers, which is basically the two presenters, Dennis Verslegers and Yves van der Beke here today to present their research project. But basically the bigger project is established by 4 researchers, because the book where we're going to talk about is actually established by 4 researchers. But that being said, is that the other 2 researchers are not here today. That is Tapan Kumar and Maria Chapton. And we are going to talk on the 2 domains which are, let's say, a predominant factor in the book. So we have 3 speakers today. That is myself, Yves van der Beek and Dennis Verslegers. We would like you to turn off your camera and your audio, so we have all the room to elaborate on the book. If you have questions, intermediate questions, please put them in the chat. And at the end, after the 45 to 50 minutes, we have some room for debate, some discussions. I would like to invite you to enter your full name, also to make sure that your PE registration number or your PE registration is handled sufficiently. So make sure that you have your full name registered, so your first name and your last name. And we would like to encourage you to ask a couple of good questions. And the best questions during this presentation will be rewarded by the book that we've written. So we really want you to have an active participation. So on behalf of the Antwerp Management School, what you see here is the beautiful harbor of Antwerp. So we are proud to present on our behalf the research project. My name is Juri Bobbert. I'm the academic director on Antwerp Management School, and I will guide you to this session. So let me start first by elaborating a little bit on what we do at Antwerp Management School. And so at Antwerp Management School, we are now happy to with our anniversary, our 30-year anniversary of the executive IT master education. 30 years already, so 30 years back, we started with our first IT executive management education. And what's symbolic to this education is that we practice design science research. So what we do in the executive masters, we allow the students to do research on a practical problem. So a practical problem that they can address by a design science approach, where they actually design an artifact that solves a problem, a real life problem. This research that we are going to present today is also based upon design science research. So there is a real problem, in this case, issues with digital platforms. And the researchers are going to examine the topic based on literature research, going to craft an artifact that might solve the problem. And then they're going to test the artifact if it actually solves the problem. And we have researchers over the last 30 years in a couple of domains. And I would like to highlight a couple of them. And so we have established over the last years multiple publications, books, as well as real artifacts that solve problems. And we also did specific research in specific domains. And so you see here a couple of examples. This is, for example, a research on privacy, on the flaws of Article 32 with the GDPR, that specifically focus on what are the flaws in Article 32 that companies make, and also how to address them in the future. So constantly seeking for a solving artifact that might solve the problem. Today we're going to talk about digital platforms. So the book that we just released is called the Digital Strategic Approaches to Digital Platform Security Assurance. So the book is basically built out of 4 phases. And so the first phase is basically the introduction of what is a digital platform. That is what Yves is going to elaborate on. So Yves is going to give you an examination of all the digital platforms that he has examined over the years, focusing on governmental platforms. But building those platforms in teams in agile teams, most of the time distributed worldwide, you also suffer challenges. And those challenges in this case are examined by Tapan Kumar. He is not here today, but if you have the book, you'll see his chapter in the book examining what type of cultural challenges do you face working in agile teams in a distributed environment, in this case in the financial sector. And further on, if you look at working on those platforms, you most of the time work in a software development environment, and so on CI/CD pipelines. Maria Chapton, in this case, researched what are the best security compliance frameworks out there to apply to this more agile way of working and also more software-oriented delivery platforms. She is also not here, but she's part of the book. So if you read the full book, you also see her part. Dennis is here to elaborate on a more technical domain because people work on those platforms in pipelines, and he is going to elaborate on how do we gain security assurance over those DevOps environments. He examined multiple practices and listed out the 10 most important strategic approaches. So for that, I would like to give the floor first to Yves van der Beek as the first researcher to elaborate on his research. Yves, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. I can also say Selamat Datang, and notice just in the chat that somebody from Malaysia is joining, so I hope I pronounce it right. I'm going to try this, make it as relevant as possible. I think you all know that the Airbnbs and the Ubers, all of that, they introduce a completely new business model. Yeah? You have a platform, you have complete control over that, yeah, kind of self-service. You order a taxi and 2 minutes later somebody is driving up your alley and you can go wherever you want. So my research was starting from that platform ecosystem and that platform idea. And I've tried to map it to something that we all are. Eh? We're all citizens of a country, me from Belgium, you from the Netherlands or other countries. So what if we apply this to citizen services? And today, and probably it's the same in your country, if you need a citizen service like a permit, education, healthcare, unemployment services, to you, not the garbage bin collection that are centrally managed. I don't know how it is in your country, but I've seen in many countries it's still, yeah, you go to a website, you have to look through all of these documents. Sometimes there's a PDF hidden. If you're lucky, you can fill it in online. Otherwise, you still have to print it. You have to send it out to an agency for processing. If you're lucky, you get an approval. Otherwise, you get some other questions. So most of citizen services today are very linear, and I'm sure you recognize that as well. Yeah? So my research was all about, okay, what if we would apply the platform concepts? What if the government would be operating a platform and they put out the services out there on the platform, so that you as a citizen, you get a certain budget allocated depending on your situation. And you as a citizen, you can search for the right ecosystem or supplier that fits your needs. And actually, you can start the interaction and actually order the service online. So we're taking the Airbnb, the Uber models, and actually start applying these to, to citizen services. And you probably think, oh, this is science fiction, this will never happen. Well, actually, it's happening already quite a lot in the world. And there's quite some good examples out there all around the world, but I've just looked for 3 here close by. So imagine for a moment you are a homeless person. You are a homeless person. It is the middle of the winter. It's really cold out there, and you want to have a place to sleep. Now, in the past, and actually still today, that means you go to these social institutes, you knock on the door at 10 o'clock in the evening, and sometimes they say, yeah, well, sorry, no more room for you. Yeah. So that's kind of the linear way of working. Yeah. You go to that agency or to that institute, you wait for an answer. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't get it. So what if we would apply the platform model? So this is actually an example in Brussels, the first one, Surviving in Brussels, where the Brussels government has actually created the platform because guess what? Most of these homeless people also already have a mobile, so they can actually reserve a sleeping place close into their neighborhood where they are. And there are other services on the platform as well. You can get access to a meal. This will not be a 4-star restaurant meal, but actually you can actually cater for the meal that you want in the neighborhood that you are and actually make a reservation out of that one. So the platform idea, the Brussels has collected an ecosystem of all of these suppliers. You as a homeless person, you can actually order a sleeping place for tonight. You don't have to wander around anymore in the middle of the city. And actually, yeah, you can rest assured that you will get access to healthcare, even a shower or a doctor, whatever you need. So that's a really good example of personalized services and focused on the homeless people. In Flanders, they have something called the care budget, which is a good example of using the platform model, but then in healthcare. So in personal healthcare services to you. So actually you get a monthly allowance from the government, depending your specific situation. The government of Flanders has opened a website with all of these ecosystem suppliers out there. You can select the one that fits your needs the best, and you can initiate the transaction directly. Yeah? So you're pretty much in control of what services you actually order from the catalog from the Flemish government. Yeah. And actually, I've seen exactly the same thing starting up in the Netherlands. That's the third example. STAP, it's called. It's in the education space. It's UWV. And in Belgium, we have something similar. It's an agency that caters for unemployed. And this is the case where you get from the government a yearly training budget. And the government will provide you a platform not only to get that budget, but actually order the transaction, order the training with one of the selected providers. Then obviously you go to that supplier or you follow the train online and you get a certificate on your platform as well. So there are some examples, but you see that in all of the countries, lots of these examples popping up everywhere. Yeah, and always triggered from a very social inspired self-service. It is all personalized. Sometimes you get your own budget, you get a choice of providers, and it's the government themselves providing a platform. Sounds good so far, you might think, yeah. But when you dig a little bit deeper, then you see that governments in general are pretty late in adopting technology and absolutely late in using the platform model. Yes, the industry, and here we go again, the Ubers are pretty far advanced. Okay, there's some issues maybe with regulations, but when you reflect that to government and citizen services, they're still pretty much in the early stages. So my research was all about, how do you now strategize and design a platform model for citizen services, so for government organizations. And it's a little bit different than the traditional industries. Yeah? And if you have a strategy, how do you organize yourself for actually exploring such a platform model? Yeah, because I think there's no doubt there's enough literature out there, and platforms are here to stay. So actually, what we are seeing as experiments happening in these government agencies will only become more. So I think this is really the right time to start describing these strategies and organizational models, because governments cannot afford to have a hit and miss on this one. They cannot afford to have your data loose out there like some others are doing, sell your data. So there are some very specific elements that require a little bit different approach to strategizing and organizing for such a government model. Yeah. So what I've done is I created what we call strategic approaches, and there are about 10 of them. And today we only have 20 minutes. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm going to zoom in a couple of them. So I grouped them in 4 areas. And one of the first, we use the design research. So one of the first artifacts that I created and also tested in the field with some case organizations is how do you do the vision and the strategy of such a platform model. And I will show you a little bit later in detail how this works. Academics, they like these magic quadrant models, so I kind of use this approach as well. Yeah. The next phase is planning. Yeah. So how do you plan a roadmap for the deployment of your platform model? And for that, I created a very specific maturity model, which is following the same principles of any maturity model, but all of the elements are very specific to a platform organization. Actually, I've written them for a government, but you can apply them to any other kind of organization as well. Yeah. Once you have your vision and your strategy and you have your plan, then you can start designing your governance model and actually your organization around that. So I spent quite some time in digging into these fantastic COVID 2019 books and try to design an example for you, which is actually really focused and tailored on government organizations. Now it's nice to have all of that, but at the end of the day, you still need to measure it. So I also used one of these old things, the balance scorecard, but it's not about the balance scorecard. It's a way of getting objectives and metrics actually interlocked from an IT perspective to align with the vision and the strategy, so that every dollar or every euro you put in the IT, that you actually can attribute that to the platform strategy. Yeah. So let's dig in a little bit deeper and show you a little bit what is more behind these models. Yeah. So if you're thinking about creating a vision or a strategy for a platform model, yeah, it's very interesting to have some kind of a checklist. That's not really a checklist, but some kind of guidance. And I use this capability model out there, and there are about 2 series of 30 indicators behind there, which are converted in a series of questions, and you answer them, and there's a kind of a scale out there, and actually at the end of the day you can plot yourself on one of these magic quadrants. Now that's the easy part. What I've seen in my case research, and I'll show you in a second, is that while we were running over those indicators in organizations which I thought were pretty much advanced, which I thought were in the transformative phase, most of the response was, oh my God, I didn't realize this. Oh my God, do we also have to do that? Oh my God, I never thought about this, So it really triggered a very good discussion. And even those examples that are pretty far advanced, in my cases, turned out that they still had some gaps versus these indicators, which are coming actually from research and case studies. On the other hand, when you look internationally, there are some countries out there that are pretty far advanced and that are really truly in the transformative phase. I don't know why, but the further you go to the east, sorry for the Malaysian friends, a little bit further, yeah. If you go to New Zealand and Australia, you find pretty good examples of platform models out there, which, if you look at the indicators, they kind of followed all of these indicators down there as well. China, special case, but pretty far advanced, pretty much adopting the platform model, certainly for healthcare services. You will see in the book there are some strange reasons behind that, because China wants to control a little bit the medicine, or even fake medicine. So there are some other reasons behind that as well, but definitely a good example out there. Yeah. So if you want to do vision and strategy, I advise you to take a look at these 30 indicators, run through them with your business leadership, and you will get a pretty good idea of all of the aspects you need to cater for when you actually start designing a platform model. Yeah. Next one is, the platform maturity model. It's always nice to know where you are, where you want to go, and what does that mean exactly. So I created this model, and actually behind this very simple picture, there are again about 20 to 30 characteristics, and all of them have been nominated. What does that mean for level 1, for level 2, so for level 3? So actually you can assess yourself or your organization based on the characteristics. I also did this on 3 different levels. So what does that mean for the strategic part of the organization? What does that mean from the tactical part? And what does that mean on the operational level? So you can see where you are and where you want to be. And I can assure you, most think they are in level 4 and they want to go to level 5. But based on my research, I've seen most of them in level 2 and hoping to get to level 3 already, So there's still some work to be done. And again, when you start discussing all of these elements and characteristics out there, some elements pop up and say, we really never thought about that. Is it really also about that? So all of my research, I've tried to put that in the maturity model as a guidance for you if you want to apply it to your organization and actually start using it. Yeah. So let's go a little bit back to the cases. I had 3 organizations in Flanders, VDAB, that's the Department of Works, not a pension, Department of Works. So they cater for unemployed. LB365 is a local city and communality platform, and ACPAS is actually the version that is operating in Antwerp, the Antwerp City Platform as a Service. Sorry, the logos are a little bit small. Yeah, I really liked the VDAB because they really decided to outsource what is considered the core business of the VDAB. And the core business is they collect all of the requirements from the field about vacatures, from positions out there to be filled in. And they have a list of the unemployed and they try to match them together. So what they've done is they created an ecosystem of actually private companies that do the matching on behalf of the VDAB. So they get the data and the functionality out there, and actually they do the matching themselves much faster than the government organization can do it themselves. So VDAB said, so why do we have to have all this big organization? Actually, if we start giving the data and the functionality in a controlled and in a secure way, Dennis will touch on that one, then we can actually improve the efficiency and getting those people, those unemployed, much faster to the right job. So you can see where the three cases are. There's one in yellow, and that's a pretty interesting one, because the ACPAS, the Antwerp City Platform, they started as a technical platform. The business was actually not really aware of the possibilities. They did not want to participate in my survey, but actually they got cases out there that really fit the platform model. So I would say there's a lot of room for improvement, and if they would see a little bit closer to this study, they would actually even get much higher in the ranking. So three cases that I researched and actually applied these models for. Now, one of the the third strategic approach is now how you do design a governance model for a platform model. And after spending a lot of time with all of these organizations and through these wonderful books of COVID, falling asleep after 3 hours, how these books are. I try to come up with an organizational model. Now, to understand that, you have to know that the platform is pretty unique. What do I mean? It's the kind of, first, it's a unique situation where the business and IT are not left and right anymore in an organization, but they have to become one. You can only succeed in a platform model if business and IT are one team. Why? Because the product of the business is the platform. They will redesign the services so that other stakeholders, third parties, will be able to execute them. So instead that the business becomes the actor, they become the director of services. And IT, the product from IT is the platform, from a technology point of view, of course. So, you have a very specific situation now where the product of both the business and IT is the platform that you put out into the world. That means you need very specific roles to make sure that the strategy is well taken a look at. So you need to have a strategy committee, at the level of board of directors, which is still valid for others as well. But you need some new roles, like a platform transformation leader, a platform governance officer, and actually a platform steering committee out there as well, because there are other stakeholders that are entering the equation. So how do you manage an ecosystem? How do you make sure that they get the right data? How do they make sure that the privacy of the data of the citizen is guaranteed? So there's a whole bunch of extra requirements popping up. And I'm only touching here the surface, but in the book you have a very long list of all of suggestions and recommendations to actually start forming this joint platform leadership team. And finally, one of the last one is, of course, you have to measure the progress of all of that. It's nice to have a strategy. It's nice to have been executing. But actually, you need to make sure that if you have a platform organization, you will be investing heavily in technology, like APIs and all of that as well, security, data privacy, artificial intelligence, algorithms that do the matching, some kind of Tinder algorithm. I don't know, no any experience with that, but there's a lot of investments in IT that form the backbone platform. But actually, that's nice, but you need to be sure that the business is aligned with these investments, that they know how to redesign their processes and their services to put it out on the platform, because at the end of the day, it will be a completely different model. The citizens will log on to the platform and initiate the transactions themselves, So any investments you put in the platform, you should be able to contribute to the business in the way they redesign the processes, which should impact, they must impact the citizen services, because they will be in control. You as a citizen will be in control. And actually, these three will be input output to showing how you are realizing your platform strategy. Now, this might be obvious in an industry, but in a government, that's maybe still a little bit interesting to find out how they do that. Now, I got a good example even for you where I found during the literature research that they actually did a pretty good job in actually writing down most of the strategic approaches that I was actually going over. They really put the strategic context out there. They put a vision out there for digital platforms. They described the key and critical success factors. They even described a platform operating model, and hip hip hooray. You can see the governance on the right-hand side. They really did a good job in understanding that if you have a team that is business and IT joined up, you really need some specific roles in there, some specific structures in there that is actually watchdogging the realization. So pretty good example. Applause from Australia. If there are any Aussies in here, congratulations. And maybe after this session, we can touch base, because this is from 2019. I checked it this morning. That kind of faded away a little bit in the background due to COVID. Yeah, okay, understandable. Yeah, but it's a very interesting one to follow up on. Yeah. Now, you might ask the fundamental question, this is all very nice, and these instruments are nice, but based on the research, can we state that the government platform model does really make a difference when designed properly, of course, yeah. So, I can really testify that in my cases that I've researched, there is value for the government. Take a look at VDIB. Yeah? They do faster matching of an unemployed, so people get a job faster than before. There's a lot of efficiency improvement in the organization, so there is value for any government organization out there. Yeah? There are obvious benefits for citizens, because you are in control. Yes, you can steer it yourself. I know there are cases like inclusion, so maybe you need some assistance in working with the platform, but actually, citizens can really now focus on self-servicing. There are benefits for the government, like I explained, but also for the ecosystem. I've spoken to a lot of industrial companies, and they say, this is a good model of getting our services out. Yes. Obviously, we want a stable organization, and governments cannot change their way of working every 2 minutes. But giving that, we are willing to put our services out there on the government platform. Now, political leadership is a pretty interesting one. When I was writing that, I did not see a lot of political leadership. That means politicians saying that they're going to improve the citizen services and they're going to use the platform as a model. Now, as a politician, that's not an easy message to bring. But, in Flanders, our Prime Minister, Mr. Jan Bon, is actually nominating the platform model in his latest speech as part of the Relance plan, and says, with the care budget, the example that I've just shown you in the beginning, we're going to continue growing that example, and we're going to expand the scope to other services as well. So it's the first time that I hear the Prime Minister even using the platform model, not in a technology way, but actually the vision and the strategy, and starting to apply that. Interestingly enough, an ecosystem, it's the most hardest thing that most of these case organizations replied to, and said, this is not easy, but it is possible. It is possible to go and sit around the table and make agreements how this ecosystem is using your platform, is actually showing their services on it, and actually making money out of it. Now, most of the examples are also in the social area. Remember the first example, but using an ecosystem is possible. That doesn't mean it's very easy and it works just like that, but it is possible. Okay, just to finish it up. Now, what can this mean for you? I think most of the things that I've researched and documented, and you will see from my colleague Dennis pretty later on, also the security and the data and the privacy around that, at least it gives you some ideas of where and how to approach actually the vision and the strategy on a platform model. Yes, for government organizations. It allows you to evaluate your options and plan your roadmaps. The most feedback I got is from, oh, I didn't realize that this was also interesting. I didn't know that we also should be thinking about this. So at least it gives you a complete picture to actually start thinking about your strategy, planning your roadmap, talking with your political level on that one. Yeah, leadership is always important, but translating that into a citizen service vision is a little bit different in governments, and actually redesigning services from PDF to a platform is a little bit different as well, you know. And I did not touch too much on the technology, but this is absolutely based on technology. It's really based on data that you collect from that citizen. So privacy and risk management is crucial to this story. And I think I also showed you how governance is actually different for organizing a platform model. So I would say, go and talk to your leadership, to your political leadership. Tell them you want to have self-service on a platform model, that would really improve your way of working, and actually use some of these research would be nice actually to incorporate it into in your work. So with that, I will give the word to Dennis, and Dennis will give you a little bit more detail, well, a lot more detail, on how to handle the risk around this. Dennis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yves. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dennis. I'm your host for the second part of this webinar. And Yves did an excellent job explaining how platform models can bring value to government and to businesses. And he kind of kindly opened the door for me because I'm really excited to explain you how you can do this while still being able to sleep at night. And so to do that, we're going to jump into the operational aspects of these digital platforms, because in most cases, as indicated by Yves, it involves some form of software development. We need this digital platform to be developed. Organizations can choose to do this using internal development teams, reinforced with external consultants, or outsourced to external parties. That makes a big difference, but not for the remainder of this presentation. And secondly, the software which has been developed obviously runs somewhere, and for this we see an increasing reliance on cloud technology. So it can be run on premise in a hybrid mode or completely hosted. This does not make a difference. And what we also see is that these two components become increasingly intertwined. So software development and the infrastructure on which it's going to run is coming closer together, and it becomes more and more difficult to untangle them. So with this operational view, we can take a look at the different forces that come into play when looking at these digital platforms. And the first one has been extensively debated by Yves. It's the case that these digital platforms tend to be an important driver for competitive advantage. They can provide direct contribution to business value, government value, but as a consequence, we also get an increasing pressure on time to market. The faster you're able to deliver new functionality, the more value you're going to create, or the bigger your competitive advantage is likely to become. And so to cope with these increased demands from business, we see new emerging organizational approaches, new work methods. Some of the fashionable ones of the last decade are agile and DevOps. But what they have in common is that it usually involves moving away from siloed IT organizations into more fluent structures. And the problem here, or the challenge I'd rather say here, is that traditional security practices don't always fit very well with these organizational approaches. And then as these digital platforms gain in importance and their footprint in society increases, we also see new regulations popping up. I'm sure many of you are familiar with GDPR, NIS, PCI, and other regulations. And if you are acting as an external vendor or provider, you will probably have already noticed increased demand for vendor compliance. So we see that from a compliance perspective, the pressure on providing assurance in these digital platforms increases. And then last but not least, we have technological advances to support these new ways of working, to meet these demands. We also see a move to readily available and scalable resources, a heavy reliance on automation. Basically, we try to do everything as code. And we are moving towards API-driven technologies where certain complexity is abstracted away behind APIs, which can be leveraged by different people. And this, we see some of the forces that come into play. And given that this is an ISACA conference, I'm pretty sure I don't need to point this out, but for clarity's sake, I will. As business value increases around these digital platforms, we can argue that potential security breaches will also face a higher impact. So from a risk perspective, the more business value is involved, the higher the potential impact becomes in case of a security breach. On the other hand, we have the technological advances, and technological advances provide a lot of opportunities, but they also create a much more complex IT landscape. I think if we look at the business systems and the web applications we used to build and host 10, 15 years ago, and you compare with the technology which is used today, you will agree that the degree of complexity has risen dramatically. And so an increase in complexity also increases the likelihood that mistakes happen, that misconfigurations happen, and as a consequence, our likelihood of a security breach might be affected and might increase. And then we see on the compliance front, most of these regulations obviously only make sense if there are also consequences to non-compliance. These consequences in themselves form a potential impact in case of a security breach. And in addition, we see that the enforcement of these regulations is becoming tighter. And as a consequence, the likelihood that you will face these consequences is also going to rise. So we could argue that some of these forces affect the risk landscape of an organization. And the organizational approaches that most organizations put against it also have some potential to increase risk, but there's also quite some opportunity hidden inside. And so one of these organizational approaches which has been in fashion lately is DevOps. For those, I presume most of you are familiar with DevOps, but it basically revolves around bringing business development and operations together, preferably around a common shared business objective. They focus on high frequency iterations over relatively small work items, and they leverage automation and collaboration to deliver business value at a very rapid pace. Now, what you see there is that the forces which were mentioned before are bringing organizations to realize that it does not matter how fast you go if security and compliance cannot keep up. And so we see a natural evolution from DevOps into DevSecOps, where the statement is that security must be integrated at the core of this process. And that's a very interesting statement which you come across very often, but very rarely is also mentioned where security exactly must be integrated. And so this was the premise of our research, basically answering the question, how do we integrate security in DevOps without velocity, because this is exactly the quality we want to retain. And so during this research, we set out and did an academic literature review to compile the current state of play in terms of security activities that are relevant for DevOps. But seeing that this field is advancing extremely rapidly, we very quickly decided to go out on the field and to talk to a high number of DevSecOps experts. They were not easy to find, in all honesty. And we interviewed some of them, and we organized expert panels where these experts were given the opportunity to elaborate our list of activities, also to rank them in terms of effectiveness, in terms of cost, in terms of delay. And they also contributed their perspectives on how these activities would be done most efficiently. And so all of this together led us to a total of 33 security activities which are relevant to DevOps, and over 100 design factors. And so in the research for each of these activities, you will find an overview, you will find potentially useful methodologies or tools, metrics, and design factors. It would go a little bit too far to go into detail on these security activities. Maybe one thing to note is that they do spread out across all the stages of the DevOps cycle. And so they basically form a chain from prevention to detection. And this leads us to the statement that security can actually benefit from the ability to deliver change in production at a rapid pace, because this allows you to adapt to the changing threat landscape. It allows you to prevent or to react to potential issues you detect. That being said, for the remainder of this webinar, unfortunately, I could spend, I think, a week talking about these activities and how they play out. But for the sake of time, I will focus on the core strategies. And basically, these strategies were derived from these activities, and they provide a high-level view on how to approach these things. The first strategy we'd like to point out is a little bit of an umbrella strategy. Many of the other strategies directly or indirectly contribute to this. But I think Yves also clearly mentioned that in these digital platforms, it's crucial that business and IT is brought very closely together to drive this platform. And so what we really want, you see a lot of stakeholders being involved in DevOps and DevSecOps, and we really want to achieve a security culture. We can do this by educating management on security aspects. We can do this by advocating security. We also can do this by applying open communication. So we're going to talk about security incidents. We're going to talk about the business value of security. We're going to talk about the results of penetration tests and so on. But obviously, establishing a security culture or a solid security engineering culture is easier said than done. There are no recipes, obviously. So what I will do is I will highlight which of the other strategies play into this one. And the first one is to maintain a business perspective. Again, as mentioned before, business should be involved in driving the digital platform. And as we all have already witnessed, engineering teams have a tendency to talk in technical terms. I'm sure I'm not saying anything new here. What really is important is to translate all the security activities, the initiatives, but also the flaws and the issues, and to translate them back in how they relate to business risk. And this is key to gaining a buy-in, obviously, but it's also key because it contributes to a security culture, because you should be able to explain to everyone involved why it matters what they are asked to do, or what they can contribute to. More on this later. Another thing which many of the experts have emphasized is that their organizations tend to be functionality first. That security and other non-functional requirements tend to be implicitly deprioritized. In part, this can be explained because product owners in agile methodologies are driving the product evolution, and obviously their interest is to drive the product to the highest value possible. And the most visible value usually lies in business features, and therefore we see implicit deprioritization, not only of security requirements, but also of other non-functional requirements. And therefore, in the book, we give a couple of handles to make these security trade-offs explicit. That's really important. We can do this, for instance, by establishing thresholds, which cannot be crossed. Otherwise, a product has to pick up certain security requirements. An example of that is security defect density. Another approach which is advocated is to reserve part of the development time in each cycle, in each sprint, and dedicate it towards security and non-functional requirements. There are many approaches possible. What is important is that security trade-offs are made explicit. The reason why this is important is also because this is the only way to establish a shared security perspective. As you can imagine, to integrate security in each of the steps of the DevOps process, a lot of different stakeholders are involved with completely different context and skill sets. And it's really important that everybody understands the security goals, that they are clearly expressed, and also that the importance from a business perspective, which we established earlier, and the security trade-offs that have been made are clear for everyone. This allows people to reflect on how they can contribute to achieving these goals. It allows them to see the bigger picture, and as a consequence, it also contributes again to the security culture. Now, with an established security perspective comes one of the hardest parts when it comes to security organizations, and that is letting go. In the sense that we need to empower teams so that they can take ownership of part of the security outcomes. By giving them ownership, they can weigh off initiatives, they can experiment to achieve these goals and objectives. So they need to get some freedom to make decisions also in the security domain. And this can be done by creating guardrails, which are basically allowed deviations within which we can allow a team to make decisions themselves. And they only need to seek agreement when they decide to break out of these boundaries to do things which normally would lie outside of these guardrails. And by doing that, you can really push the ownership to the teams. Now, pushing ownership is one thing, but we also need to give them a way to know how they are doing, how progress is going. And so we need to establish security observability. Throughout the DevOps lifecycle, we can use a large array of tools. This traditionally is the main area of security because a lot of vendors are active here. So I think most of the content you find is about products, and there are a lot. So there are many tools you can use in DevOps for security purposes, and it's really important to collect the metrics that these various tools produce. These metrics can allow a team to identify how they are doing, what their progress is, if there are deviations, if they are within guardrails or outside. So you can collect these metrics through the CI/CD pipeline or the continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline. And instead of hiding these metrics or making them only for the security team, it would be a good idea to make these available as a self-service to the teams. On top of that, it allows security teams to identify product teams which are facing certain obstacles, which need potentially certain injections of knowledge, and so they can provide targeted guidance to these teams, which is really relevant to the work they are doing, as opposed to organizing broad general security trainings where most probably only the first 10 minutes are remembered, and after that it fades away. And then from security observability, it's only a relatively small step towards performing continuous assurance. You can basically leverage these metrics to ensure that the products which are going through the lifecycle steps comply with our requirements. And one of the best ways to achieve this is to stop and not allow going to the next phase if it does not comply. This provides enormous benefits because you can gain additional assurance. You only need to convince the auditors that the mechanisms and the controls in place are effective, and you can discuss the requirements. And this relieves a lot of the burden when it comes to performing compliance assessments. Then another strategy which directly contributes to security culture is to practice incident response. Many people, when talking about incident response, think about operation teams or security operation centers that come into play and are doing blue team, red team exercises, purple team exercises, whatnot. But we really want to advocate to include development in these exercises, to include operations in these exercises, and to establish some form of emergency code-based response. The concept behind it is that basically when an incident occurs, you want these people to be on board, to be reachable, and to think along with the Security Operations Center in terms of what can be done to mitigate the threat and what can be done to this in the future. And you will see by tackling things at the software or the cloud platform level, your reaction becomes much more effective and much quicker. Obviously, by doing this, you also put security clearly on the agenda of the organization. By these type of exercises, you are emphasizing as an organization that security belongs at the core of what people are doing and is not an auxiliary concern. So with this, we also see, and I think this has been reported by unanimously by our experts, and I guess the same will hold true here. There is an extreme lack of shortage in terms of security skills within organizations. If you look, most of the time, security engineers are heavily outnumbered as opposed to development and operations engineers. And this is not so surprising because in the end, if you want everyone to contribute to security, the only way to achieve that is to integrate security in the way they work and in their work, and also making it their responsibility, as we mentioned before. But what we need to assure is that we can achieve security scalability. And so this can be done by creating tailored methodologies that really make sense to your organizational context and also make sense to the people to whom they are directed. And these tailored methodologies allow the different teams and stakeholders to do their part of the job, to think about security while they are building something. And then on top of that, you can create consumable security services where they have the ability to reach out to a security competence center when they need advice, coaching, or when they spot certain risks that are out of bounds and that require specific attention. And so, surprisingly, the last step, one of the things which is mostly emphasized when talking about DevSecOps, I deliberately put it as the last one. Only then comes leveraging the different technologies, automating them through the so-called pipelines. There are many things you can do as code. We give a lot of examples in the research. I find it really fascinating, this technology. But in the end, we have to remember that the culture, the solid engineering culture comes first, and the tools are there to help people. What is also often overlooked is that these pipelines hold tremendous power because they are able to take artifacts from development into the production environments. So you really want to secure and tighten these pipelines to make sure that unauthorized changes cannot occur. So with these, I gave you a very high-level overview of 10 strategies on how to integrate security in DevOps. In the research itself, you can find the activities and the design factors. But what is important to keep in mind is that there is no recipe. We cannot give you a roadmap to do this. It really depends on your current state, the capabilities you have today, and leveraging these in an iterative process to integrate security at the core of DevOps. So with this, I'd like to take the opportunity to repeat, to emphasize the highlights of the second part of this webinar. First one is that we see that many organizations realize that it does not matter how fast you can go if security and compliance cannot keep up. We also saw that the activities we identified during our research form a chain from prevention to detection, where traditionally security in development and operations is mainly focused around prevention, and so making this chain a closed loop has tremendous advantages. It also allows security to benefit from the ability to deliver changes rapidly in production. This allows you to react to the changing threat landscape, to the increasing complexity, So this is really valuable. What you also probably noticed is that the strategies which I brought forward mainly revolve around people, and processes and technologies are mainly seen as supporting measures. And in the end, what we really want to achieve is a solid engineering culture within our organization. So if you're interested on reading up on this topic and getting to know more, I can warmly advise you the Lean Security website, where you find the full research, you find infographics on the different activities, and you also find mappings to common security models, such as the Security Assurance Maturity Framework from OWASP. Obviously, if you're interested in learning more about a broader set of topics, including agile methodologies, business platform models as introduced by Yves, or the relationship between DevOps and compliance, obviously our book is the way to go. And I would be delighted to welcome you in the Master in IT Risk and Cybersecurity Management if you want to get a broad perspective on cybersecurity and risk management as a whole. With this, I thank you for your time and attention, and I pass the floor to Yuri Bobbert for his closing words.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Yves, for your elaboration. Looking at the time, we have a couple of minutes left for some important items to mention here. So first of all, I would like to highlight what are we doing at Antwerp Management School is basically educating executive masters on the level of IT architecture, management, governance, and the new masters there, the IT risk and cybersecurity management education. 50% of the students is, by the way, from the Netherlands. So we have a lot of Dutch alumni working on several aspects. I think the popularity of the education is predominantly because we focus on leadership and on, for example, economics, risk quantification, architecture, building target operating models, and benchmarking. So also the financial aspects of cybersecurity. If you would like to have more information about the education, then I think it's interesting for you to get into contact with Danny Lauwers. Let me see if I have here. Yeah, I think the slide is there, or this one. So this is the main contact for you to contact Danny Lauwers, our General Director for the education. Let's take some extra time for the Q&A because we have collected a huge amount of good questions from this group. So the encouragement at the beginning of the lecture was really good because people fired away a lot of questions, but I've selected 5 very good ones. And for the people that want to still join to see if your question is there, but also if you have the answer to the question, then remain in the call. If not, and you want to go to have dinner or enjoy the beautiful weather, that's also fine. I have the first question, which is basically a question that Emma Goodwin requested in the chat, and I think it's a very solid one for Dennis. She stated that continuous assurance implies continuous monitoring and continuous auditing, but don't see that in the model. So Dennis, perhaps you can elaborate a little bit on what your perception is about continuous assurance.
Yeah, no, indeed. Thank you. Well, what you will notice is that in the security activities which were identified during the research, actually these 2 aspects have received a lot of attention, and I think almost a third of all the activities focus in this area. I kind of decided to emphasize them in the strategic approaches from the sense that they provide feedback to the teams. You can stop on fail, basically, so you can do compliance as code. And so I think you also had another comment about the guardrails needing to be enforced and protected, and this exactly plays into that. So we expect to leverage technology to ensure that compliance is achieved and that the guardrails are not crossed. I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to come back.
And then I have a question for Yves, which I think is also really relevant. It was questioned by Wim van der Ende, who really put a lot of effort into getting a lot of good questions there. So Wim, all my big compliments to you. And we're talking about a lot about IT platforms, Yves. So, but what can we learn from other, let's say, OT platforms? some more industry-related platforms. Do you have experience? Did you encounter one of them in your research?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've seen your question. I tried to answer already a couple of them. Yeah. Again, as I said, the industry, so the OTs are pretty much advanced. They're using technology much far further ahead and broader than governments. So governments are behind. Yeah. So I mean, I've stated the obvious examples like Airbnb and Uber and stuff like that as well. But governments tend to be not only late, but also little experience in applying artificial intelligence in the context of platforms. Because if you want to make services self-service and proactive and actually suggest items out there, you will have to have some kind of matching algorithm behind that as well. And governments in general and artificial intelligence, bit scary because of transparency, and actually that's a good thing. So yes, governments are lagging behind, and they need to catch up. Because otherwise, these Airbnbs, they will keep on evolving, they will keep on adding features. Surely governments also need to regulate that, but actually, they cannot stay behind in the self-service. And I think I saw another question from you as well about what about inclusion? Actually, I found a Dutch study that says that most of the people still want to talk to somebody about government service. They still prefer physical contact. Yeah. So your question is spot on. Nevertheless, I think like in banking and mobile apps, there will be a tipping point soon. The younger generation doesn't go to the bank anymore, doesn't go to the postal office anymore. They hate going to the government office, So yes, inclusion is pretty important, but soon there will be a more younger generation that kind of thinks it's normal that they will get self-service from a government. So yeah, it's a dilemma for the moment, and it's not easy to answer. But I think just like in banking, there will be a tipping point somewhere. Sorry, Yuri, I answered two questions here.
Yeah, but the nice thing is that I actually had the same question, because I was reflecting that to what we see also here in the Netherlands in the government, is that there is a need for personal contact. And I also had a very good question from, I think it was also from Wim, but I really wanted to ask this because I think you encountered that in Belgium. Is what about the identity issue is, if somebody doesn't have a registration because he's homeless, for example, or he absence or he misses his registration. Did you encounter that?
I'll first tell you the solution. Yeah. So I kind of stated that the homeless has a mobile phone, but I mean, the government of Brussels realized that not everybody has a phone. So what they're also doing is they have these kiosks at the bus office, kind of a display, a kind of a touch display, and actually these people can also start this service on that display and actually do the transaction actually at the bus stop or at any other kiosk out there in the central station, for example. So they take a very broader look at saying at identity, and it doesn't mean you have to register your username and password before you get a homing sleeping place. So they offered alternative ways of getting to that service as well. I hope that answers that a little bit. Yeah. But you're right, Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so let's see. We'll reward the people that had the best question, but I think we have so many questions that we can talk for hours, but we need to stop somewhere. So let's close off the session by thanking you all on behalf of ISACA, Norea, and the Antwerp Management School for us to present this beautiful research and also the book. So I think we shared the URL, but we can share that afterwards, where you can order the book. It's basically a very interesting book because it gives a very broad view over the entire research domain. So thank you very much for your time. And thank you very much, Yves and Dennis, for your presentation. And thanks to the ISACA and the Norea administration and the organization for organizing and having us. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.
Good evening.